A final good afternoon from me now as we enter this final session of today's event. It's been a bit of a long day with a lot of information, but we're going to finish with what I hope you will agree are two very interesting panels. Now, these panels, the first one will cover the state's implementation plans. So I'll come back to that one in a second. And the final panel of the day will be institutional, European institutional look forward at future plans in Europe. So, with no further ado, we now have a panel looking at how a selection of European states are already starting to, either planning or starting to implement U-Space in their respective states. I'd like to welcome up to the stage to join me now, Antoine Martin, Camilla Tripaldi, Dr. Jan Dirks, and Mina Estelle Munoz, please. We'll start with Antoine Martin. Antoine is the Advanced ATM Officer from DGAC and DSAC, the French Civil Aviation Safety Directorate. He has nearly 25 years' experience in air navigation services and also UTM, currently taking care of U-Space certification and oversight activity in France. Antoine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been asked by Robin to tell you a few words about what's happening in France in terms of U-Space implementation. And as some others did today, I would like to do some kind of history and to explain how we are coming from prototypes of U-Space to eventually U-Space implementation. So where do we come from? Well, maybe we come from a time when, at the very beginning of the emergence of drone operations in our airspaces in the early 2010s or in the mid-2010s. Back then, the drone maybe was seen as an annoyance before being seen as a business opportunity and for job creation, for instance. But first, maybe it began as a nuisance. But we dealt with it. In France, we had very early regulation from 2012, we had regulation to support early drone operations in airspaces. But that was just the beginning. In the mid-2010s, a lot of work was ongoing regarding drone operations all across the world. There was regulation works, there were legal works on counter-UAS, for instance, spectrum issues. Of course, there were a lot of work starting from the SESAR perspective, of course, and that led to several SESAR projects in which, for instance, France and the ANSP, DSNA has been involved, such as the Podium project, for instance, or the USIS project, or, of course, the Chorus project, which is the father or the mother of the Chorus XUM project that has been presented today. So there were a lot of work ongoing at that time on how to support drone operations into the airspace. At some point, U-Space was a vision we all wanted to achieve in Europe so that we can integrate US operations into airspace, of course, in a safe and fair manner. And in France, we wonder, there were still a lot of open questions regarding the real operation needs, the funding, and so on and so on. And what we wanted is to build U-Space in a very collaborative manner, in a very open manner, and of course in a very scalable manner. so that we can reach that goal. Remind yourself that at that time, back in that time, 4 years or 5 years ago, there was no use space regulation. There was no fixed use space services list. There were a competition between use space or UTM services list. So to achieve this collaborative construction, building of use space, first we asked the ecosystem with a request for information on what are the needs, how we can build use space, and from that, and building from first experiment, live experiment, SESAR experiment, and other experiment all across France, we made an RFP, and we ended up with 8 contracts to test UTM and UTM services in controlled airspace around about 20 airports all across France, which was done under the umbrella of the Use Space Together project, and this was called the step 1 of the Use Space Together experiments. This was a collaborative project with many players from the industry. And the next step should be available from next year, 2023. It's called Use Space Together Step 2. It's a larger experiment. It's not use space yet. It's a deployment of pre-use space demonstrators. But it is very large scale. It is collaborative with 3 consortiums from the industry that will be able to operate multiple USSP-like solutions. And of course, it's a joint civil-military collaboration because it is absolutely essential to work with the military for use space. So this is the next step to support further development. And now what? What about use space regulation? France has prepared a USSP single CISP certification process. Now it is open. This certification process is open. We are working closely with the agency, the ESA, to implement this certification process, obviously. So this is the first building block. The second building block is our airspace strategy regarding use space. Obviously, like others, we will go for localized use space airspaces, at least at the early beginnings. We will discuss that maybe in 20 years ahead, but for the beginning, there will be localized use space airspaces. And the use space airspace creation request may be led by stakeholders. So you are, as a stakeholders or a bunch of stakeholders, you can come with a project, with a use space creation project. Of course, you provide with specifications, design plans, risk assessment, and so on and so on. And this is a starting point for the creation of a use space airspace. As regards common information services, France has not decided to go for a single CISP at a national level. At that stage, the strategy is a case-by-case study per use space airspace, and we are investigating in depth both centralized and decentralized CIS models. Of course, at the end, there will be a formal designation by the authorities, and actually it will be a joint designation by the civil ministry and of aviation, and the military. And we decided to go for a publication of use space airspace as, of course, as US geographical zones, of course, by definition, and by regulation, there are US geographical zones, sorry. But they will be also published as restricted areas at the same time. So in a nutshell, France is getting ready for U-Space in 2023. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. Very clear exposition of a stepwise and regional development and implementation of U-Space. Next, I'd like to invite Carmela Tripaldi to talk to us. Carmela is the Director of Research and Development, New Technologies and Aerospace at INAC, the Italian CAA. She has a long experience in the field of safety management and regulation, airspace certification of aircraft and aviation organizations, and flight operations. She is the driver of the Italian Advanced Air Mobility Strategy for the creation of an Italian U-Space ecosystem. Carmela.
Today, I'd like to show you what we do and what we are doing to do for enabling drone operation and innovative air mobility in our country. Everybody knows that technology is changing the mobility, including aviation, for moving people, goods, and now our services, which increase the overall accessibility of territory, and we hope the quality of the life. The regulatory challenge is how to keep up. And the new role of the authority, we think, is to enable a sustainable and secure ecosystem, open to integration innovation, which continues to present new products. Our sky are changing. Various vehicles, different sites, and tasks involving rural areas, cities, centers, and traditional airports. Enabling a sustainable and secure ecosystem is the key integration. The challenge is to do those very fast. In this slide, we show where we were and where we are. We are summarized in the result on a timeline. In Italy, we started to work about the new mobility in 2019. And now it is continuing in 2021. We did the three things. We created a roadmap, a strategic plan, and a business plan. Focus on the financial details and our expected returns on investment, because all this has to be sustainable. Most recently, we have established alliances with territories and with main stakeholders. In these slides, we show our initial working definition of the new mobility, what we call advanced air mobility, which we present to EASA, and now we're working on the new calling innovative air services. The most important basic element of the description are a safe, secure, intermodal transportation network of services. And finally, air infrastructure and ground infrastructure are the key element of this new mobility. This is our national vision, mission, and objectives. Focus on the creation of integrated regulatory framework, not only aviation, and a favorable ecosystem, and finally, a public and private investment models. Starting from 40 applications, we select 4 priorities: air taxi, good and medical delivery, inspection mapping, agricultural support. We develop a gap analysis and identify action to address the technological and regulated weakness in a roadmap from 2021 to 2023. These are the key factors that will enable the successful of this new mobility. I want to underline just how important is public acceptance, but business model, in our opinion, is the first. The drone market is growing, but notwithstanding the expectations, it is still not clear which drone operators will supply which services in the EU space and how high the costs are going to be. Therefore, To get started with basic services, both private and public investments will be required. After all, an operator needs to know what the startup costs will be and how much profit per flight is to be earned. Finally, since tariff is divided among users, those costs are known still. In order to accelerate the creation of a national ecosystem, we identify 8 clusters. And we satisfy in cluster of action. The first 4 clusters are the most important to enable the new mobility. And the first clusters are needed to implement the EU space, in our opinion. In order to accelerate, we identify the following needs. Stay in line with the development of the European regulatory framework, an alliance of public and private organizations along with popular support in absolutely necessary. This means public and private funding, coordination with all stakeholders, creating a sustainable environmental and ecosystem. So, the first steps we achieve for acceleration is, from institutional point of view, will be to bring together the key regions and the key cities. But the airport operators and the air navigation service Italian air navigation service provider, ENAV, will put into action the first activities. The operational drivers that we are putting in place are public funding proposal to maintain the affordability of EU space operations, common information, airspace design, interoperability, dedicated CNSs. New local and national mobility planning is very important. We are working about urban air mobility sustainable plan and urban air mobility logistic plan. We published the last month our new airport national plan that include nets that are not only the traditional airports but vertiports too in the cities. And last but not least, we research local needs in order to establish a market for the new mobility and for the EU spaces network. Pilot projects under the umbrella of regions, those pilot projects will be supervised and regulated in the new sandboxes style, in particular for air taxis application and for medical delivery, because public applications are more sustainable at the first stage. We design a centralized model of Italian space. We designated a single CISP, that is the Italian Air Navigation Service Provider, ENAV, and we started the certification process of the first Italian USSP, the flight. We hope that other USP will come. That's our ambitious. In this slide, we show the roadmap. And in reality, the override object is moving the market forward. There must be a sense of urgency. Our roadmap establish. We hope our ambition is to have full U2 space portfolio ready for the end of the year, on the first months of the next years. And we have a little bit late for the certification of the CISPs. This is because we already designed ENAV, but at the moment the certification process is in progress. Just for some aspect to focalize. In reality, what is necessary to create a market? We think that the public investment could enhance the possibility to start quickly. The second, we propose to absorb the cost to maintain the affordability of the space operation, in particular for pricing for dynamic reconfiguration of airspace and for pricing of common information. Facilitate private investment, starting with pilot project in regulatory sandbox, cover applications and in particular space services. And we focus about big attractive events as Jubilee 2025 in Rome and the Winter Olympic Games 2026. Finally, it's very important, dual use of space integration at ATM for military state drones in terms of funding too, because we joined our energy, we joined the targets, and it's easy to achieve the target. In conclusion, many players, different, not only aviation, we are all on the road, we achieve a global regulatory approach, and we have to work all together. Local authorities, aviation authorities, EASA, and the European agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmela. A very clear description of your implementation plans, which are very state-focused to start with, which is an interesting model for reasons I think it will be made very, very clear. And we may come back to that later on. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Jan Dirks to join me at the podium. He is the Deputy Head of the Project Group Unmanned Aircraft at the Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport in Germany. He is responsible for policy and innovation, research and project evaluation, and airspace utilization. He covers all drone and U-space activities in Germany.
Okay, I think everybody can hear me. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. And since I'm responsible for, let's say, the implementation of the U-spaces, at first let me thank you very much, because everything which I've seen over here and outside, these are brilliant developments. This is brilliant research, and it solves finally a lot of problems that I have. So therefore, thank you very much for this exciting event, and I'm happy to be here. And okay, at first I want to talk very briefly about the goals of the federal government. The European and national legislation towards U-space, I think the European ones will be skipped, because we've heard about that this morning, so I would just talk a few words about the national legislation towards U-space. Then I will focus on the concept of the geographical zones, because these geographical zones in Germany, they help us a lot when you are coming to U-spaces, because everybody of you knows U-space is a geographical zone. I'm talking a bit later about that, and about the digital platform unmanned aircraft, which is a very good instrument. And there you can see, as a user, you can see all these geographical zones. Finally, or not finally, but in the mid, I think I will talk a bit about the U-Space Reality Lab, which was in Hamburg. And this we were very satisfied with that, because we received a very good blueprint for the installation of U-Space airspaces, and it's also playing a very important role for the UAM. Actually, yeah, we orient a lot of our politics on that U-Space Reality Lab. Then I'll provide you with some information on how we want to implement the U-Spaces in Germany, and I'm sure there will arise most of the questions over here. And finally, I summarize our general approach. So let's start with the government action plan. I mean, you can read the basic goals on the slide. I'm not going to repeat them over here. But what is it, a government action plan? A government action plan, one should not underestimate the political power of such a plan. such a strategic concept because it's not only a brochure where we give some information where you say, okay, the government provides some information on whatever topic. No, it's much more for us. It's an agenda for our policy and for the lawmakers for the near and the medium-term future. And when you're seeing these goals, these 3 goals which I've mentioned over there, I mean, this is not an empty phrase. That really means we are orienting and we are checking everything against these goals. And since this is not simply an action plan, but it's a governmental action plan, that means, of course, that all other ministries, at least the ones who care about drones, that all the other ministries have agreed to that. So, and this gives us a lot of, let's say, flexibility to implement all the goals that we have, because you can always point towards the action plan and say, okay, guys, we have agreed upon that already, so let's see how we can develop that further. So it's a very powerful instrument, a kind of action plan that we have. You can have it, you can get it in the web. Simply say government action plan. It's in German and in English. You will find it. So as I said, I'm not going to talk about the European legislation. We've heard all, and I'm also know that whoever has tried to make a research project on drones knows more or less what we are talking about. But what we have done especially with the 947, the 2019 947, which is the most important regulation for the drones, we have made a national law on that. And so it was actually a very, very difficult task, or a pretty difficult task, simply because we had to change 8 laws and regulations in Germany. And if you know that Germany is a federal state, that means, of course, a lot of coordination between the federal states, or the Länder, Bundesländer called in Germany. And so it was a pretty heavy task. What we have not yet is, of course, a law on the use spaces, on the 664. There we're still working on that. I'll tell you later about that. So as promised, geographical zones and the digital platform unmanned aircraft. It's called DPUL. If you just enter in the web, in Google, DIPUL, then you will come to the page, and it's also in English and in German. So if you're not able to read German, which I know it's a very difficult language, just read it in English. So, and I'm talking about the geographical zones here because they give us the necessary flexibility to define explicit rules in areas that have specific characteristics or special characteristics. And so they might require special rules, particular rules for safety, security, privacy, and the environment. And this is exactly what the use space is. The use, I mean, you cannot simply make one model and say, okay, these use spaces count for all over Germany or count for specific areas in Germany or whatever. You really have to check the use spaces, the areas where the use spaces should be implemented. You have to check the specifics and the characteristics of these areas, and therefore it's it's a good instrument to say use spaces are geographical zones, and they might be a bit different. Let's say in Hamburg or in Berlin or in Munich or wherever in Germany, they might be different. And in order to provide you with the information on the use spaces and all the geographical zones, just contact the DPUL. It's really our instrument of the government, and it's growing a lot. It has been developed by our air traffic control organization, and so this is really an interesting one, and it will grow, and it will help us a lot when we are coming to the use spaces. And that's exactly where we are coming now. So we are coming to the use spaces themselves. In order to operate drones safely in an urban environment, airspaces, in our opinion, provide a good solution. But of course, you have specific conditions. Both have to be recognized. So the manned aircraft and the unmanned aircraft have to recognize each other. So they have to be visible, meaning for a government, change law, of course. So then in our opinion, or it's our opinion, when we are going to implement use spaces, we will have one common or single common information service provider for all use spaces. It's simply a question of we don't want to have another common information service provider in Munich, then we have it in Aachen, then we have it in Cologne, then we have it in Hamburg, because we don't think that they are all working on the same level. Yeah, there might be changes, and we think it's very difficult to have them or to have more than one. So, and the Use-Based Reality Lab said, okay, for sure, that's for sure. They agreed upon that. So, so they gave us the blueprint for the establishment of the use spaces in Germany. So, nevertheless, the best result of this was it works. It's possible. It's possible to implement a use space in Germany. It's possible to integrate manned and unmanned aircraft. And so this was one of the basic results, even if some things were pretty humble. Like, for example, when you want to talk to the air traffic control, you did it by phone. Of course, this is not what a use space should be. A use space later on will, of course, be provide the information digitally. Yeah, that's no question. But nevertheless, they have shown use space works. So, and what we have done, because the regulation 664 on use spaces and the guiding material and the acceptable means of compliance, yeah, they gave a lot of information. They provided a lot of information, but still there were some blind spots. There were several blind spots, like questions, for example, regarding the communication protocols, questions regarding how will you include the, in Germany called BOS. These are the organizations which, for example, the Red Cross or the ADAC or whoever who make emergency issues. Yeah. So therefore, we have developed in an expert group a concept for the technical and legal requirements. And you will receive this concept, I think, I guess in 2 weeks, roughly in 2 weeks. It's currently just with the other ministries. They all signaled to me, they said, okay, yeah, it will work, it's okay with us, but we have to wait another, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks, and then you will receive that. And I already gave it to our translators, so you will receive it also in English, but that may be a bit later, perhaps 4 or 5 weeks. I don't know how long it takes them to do that. So, and this concept is really the one which is now provided to our legal experts in the ministry, and they are working on legal instruments. And since we have this concept, we think that the legal instruments, so a law on use spaces, hopefully will be established in 2023, but expect the end of 2023 in Germany. And so that we can really then implement the first use spaces at the end of 2023 or 2024. So just a short summary, how use spaces will be established in Germany. So we only want to establish use spaces where there is a high demand for the services of the use space service providers. Because in our opinion, it makes no sense if you, let's say, have a farmer who wants to fly across his acre in 10 meters high, somewhere in a rural area. He shall not pay for a use-based service provider. Apart from that, you won't have a use-based service provider because he wouldn't make any business case out of it. As my colleague has said, of course, you have to make sooner or later a business case out of that. So we only want to establish them where there is a high demand on that. And the slide shows a short summary of the most important elements of the use-based airspace. So geographic zone, one single CISP. Market will define the use space or the number of use-based service providers. We don't care whether we have several or multiple use-based service providers inside one use space, and we don't care whether they are coming from whatever country of the European Union, as long as they are certified, of course. And we think that sooner or later, after a starting phase, of course, this might be a problem to solve, as my colleague has said, that the market will regulate the number of use-based service providers in itself. If there is a high demand, okay, then every use-based service provider who is certified may apply for it. But there's just one tiny problem which we have to solve, because in Germany we think that the confirmation service, which is not obligatory in the 664, should be obligatory in Germany, but I'm sure we'll find some solutions that if we have a use-based service provider from another European state, they may just prove, okay, we also can do the confirmation service, and then it's fine. Yeah, or conformity service, sorry, not confirmation, conformity service. So, and as I said, everybody has to be certified. Everything which I've said shows to you that there's a circle, a kind of circle. To summarize, you see the government's action plan was the start of the circle, that shall result in the creation of use-based airspaces, and thereby enabling more urban air mobility, because we think this all a bit together. We think not every use space will be supporting urban air mobility, but many of them will, I'm sure about that. And so what was not included in my presentation was our mobile communication strategy, because it would be just too much over there. But you can be sure we are working on that. And so I hope I was able to provide you a short impression of what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, for that detailed look at what's planned and underway in Germany. I was very interested in your idea of high demand, use space only. So the demand will come, use space will follow. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Our final speaker is Marina Estel Munoz, and she's an aeronautical engineer, been working in the ATM team for more than 10 years, starting in an air navigation service provider, and then working as a civil aviation inspector in an ATS, ATFM, and ASM, in the Spanish Safety and Security Agency, AESA, till she reached her current position. Now, as head of airspace policy area, she is in charge of the civil-military coordination matters regarding flexible use of airspace, volcanic ash contingency management, and the development of the drone sector in airspace matters, which includes the implementation of U-Space in Spain. Impressive.
So I'm going to talk to the implementation of the U-Space in Spain, what we are doing right now. So this June, we published a national plan for the implementation of the U-Space. In Spain, we call it informally the PANDU. This plan supports the development of the U-Space system and services in Spain, and also one of the main objectives is to coordinate all the public bodies affected for this implementation, like us, the DGAC, or National Supervisory Authority, and our main air navigation service provider, and also the SES provider, and of course the Ministry of Defense, because the civil-military coordination, as our colleagues already said, is really important in this U-Space implementation. So this plan is like more or less an enabler for us to implement this complex new system. So this plan sets out 4 objectives, and it is arranged into lines of actions with specific actions and assigned responsibilities among all the competent authorities. The first objectives is regarding airspace actions. The second one is implementation of the national service provision model, which is also important, and our panelists here today we're talking about that too. And the third objective is the deployment of the U-Space and common information service providers. And the fourth one, and the last but not least, is the establishment of cooperation and collaboration mechanisms between, administration, but also stakeholders. From the regulator point of view, the main features of the Spanish U-Space deployment are, first of all, the establishment of the service provision model, which is going to be centralized model in Spain. And why we choose to be a centralized model? Well, first of all, because the SES provider is a unique, trustworthy source of reference of information and data, and also because it reduced the complexity of the whole system in these earliest stages. So we think now, in this uncertainty moment, it is important to have this under control. And the second thing that is important is the certification task. As you know, in Spain, we have different competent authorities regarding this. So the competent authority for the certification and the supervision of these new service providers is going to be our National Supervision Authority. And, well, we are waiting for this final MSc and GM package, which is going to be published soon, but it is important to have that for the certification tasks. Okay, we have this centralized model, but for the USSPs, the market is open for business as long as the USSPs are certified, and our NSA is assuring through the certification process that any certified USSP is going to be able to connect with our CISP. So that is an important point to clarify. Then we created 2 main working groups and a multi-level coordination to involve all the stakeholders in the process of the US-based airspace designation. The first one is a working group regarding the US-based implementation. This working group developed the PANDU. And the second one is a working group for the UAS geographical zones, and it has airspace coordination purposes and support the activities of the airspace management at the strategic level. And then we have a main topic here, which is the development of the US-based charging scheme. We are waiting for the SIS2 Plus, but if this goes nowhere, we are going to take action and maybe put in place some actions at national level regarding this. Regarding my main domain, which is the airspace and the designation of the US-based airspaces, we developed an airspace working method for coordinating the different parties and stakeholders. And we put in place different levels of coordination. The first level is the high-level coordination group, and is this group I was talking about, the working group for UAS geographical zones, and in this group also participate the Ministry of Defense. Then we have a second level of coordination, which involves the other ministerial departments that are not included in this first level, and also the regional and local administrations. And we are, in this second level, we are going to use the experience and the contacts of the You Welcome project that, my colleagues from ENAIRE talked about in the last panels this morning. And, we have a third level that involves the other entities and stakeholders. It is like a top-down approach. Like the first level define and disseminate the general policies, criteria, and procedures. And then these first levels receive a bottom-up approach and gather and stream up feedback and initiatives from these 2 other levels, promote the social acceptance through this open service for general public and other means. We are going to work with these other 2 levels through surveys and public consultants, which is going to be launched very soon. In the meantime, we are adapting these working methods with the European regulation, the roles of the Article 18F, defining who is the competent authority for what. For the establishment of the US-based airspaces is a joint civil-military cell, or commission, something like that. I think it is the same case as in France and in Italy, because we have this this airspace management is at the strategic level, which is a joint civil-military level. And then we are defining the US-based designation criteria and the procedures to do that in this level. Well, we noticed a problem, which is the complexity of the coordination mechanisms what are set out in the AMC and GM material right now. And we are waiting for the final version of this, because maybe we have to make changes once we have these final provisions of the AMC and GM. To finalize the presentation, the work in progress. I already talked about that, but we are now also working on the dissemination of the US-based concept. I think, well, we think it's really important that all the local authorities, the regional administrations knows what is this US-based concept, so they can know if they need these kind of services, and they can tell us. We are interested in to have these US-based services in our cities, in our regions. So we are working on that. We already made an ad hoc brochure. We are going to disseminate really soon. And also we are working in these coordination mechanisms, but the most important thing right now for us is to synchronize the US-based airspace designation process with the certification process. Because once we have an USSP or a SIS provider certificated, we need a US-based airspace for them to provide the services. Also, we think this working method is going to create demand. Like, okay, we are going to make a study, designate the first US-based airspace, and maybe doing that, we can create the demand. I think it is a different approach, like from France. Like that, we are not going to wait for the stakeholders. I think we are going to take the lead in that. So our next challenge is to designate the first US-based airspace, and we hope we can do that very soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you very much indeed for showing, once again, there are similarities and differences between the approaches for deployment across Europe. I was going to attempt to summarize, but in fact, we're getting very low on time. So what I'd like to do is to ask you all one question, which I'd like you all to have a little think about and answer in short sentences. So really, it concerns demand, because we have heard a different approach, slightly varying approach to anticipated demand and where the demand is going to come from the four of you, from an entirely almost state and public approach in Italy to the other extreme. We're not even going to designate use space until the demand is there when we have a need for one in Germany, which I know that's a simplification, but that nevertheless, it kind of shows the range here. So what I would like to do is for each of you, starting with Antoine, how do you see demand? What demand are you seeing? Are you seeing users already coming forward with business cases where they really want to fly? Or is it all a bit theoretical? Or do we see public services first? How do you see it, Antoine?
Yes, definitely there is a need for use space, especially because it is very complex to prepare BVLOS operations. It may become very complex because most of the time you need segregated airspace and then consultation, preparation, design, studies, and so on. And if it has been done once for all, well, it's easier for everyone, for all the stakeholders, including the military, the ANSP, and so on. The problem, of course, is that it requires a large amount of work to prepare that. So you have to have a certain amount of demand at a certain place to make a business case for building that. But the demand is definitely here, especially for high demand of BVLOS operations.
Our impression is that the market is growing. it's growing fast, but at the moment is not enough stable to determine a concrete business model. So our position is that at the first stage, in order to accelerate, to establish a good environment to the new space services, is to force the territories to establish needs in order to favorite through public funding the creation of a first market, because we have not enough at the moment. We have just single authorization in BVLOS in such areas, but the market for growing needs to have a high level of demand. So our intention is to absorb at the first stage the cost of, for example, the pricing of common information. That could be a way for enable the market, because when we have a few users in space, it's not easy to establish a tariff, to establish the price, the cost of the services, and we need to, in my opinion, we need to. This question should be addressed to U.S. space candidate. What they want to create a market? What are their expectations? Because to make a business around these US space services, they have to be an idea of the market. And so at the moment it's not so easy. So I think that it's very important that the member state encourage the market, encourage the local authorities, encourage the territories to establish a target, to establish needs, some needs, in order to accelerate the growing of the market. This is our point of view.
Actually, what we are doing, I think, is we're establishing a new mode of transport in a very, very short time, and there is no other mode of transport that has no market. Of course, it may be the case that at the beginning we need something to start the market, but I'm absolutely sure, especially when I'm seeing what's over here, and when I'm seeing all these producers, when I'm seeing all the researchers who are trying to figure out or to solve our problems. Actually, I'm not afraid. Of course, we will have a big market for that. Thanks.
Well, from my point of view, maybe the private business cases are not mature enough today. Yeah, but what we are going to do, or we notice that maybe we can start with the public bodies' necessities, like, I don't know, police, the Ministry of Defense, some cases that it is public and have public funding. So we are aiming to that first, okay, to prove the system and maybe to create the demand. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think many of you will be very pleased to hear the demand is there, the system's been put in there, there should be some state help to start with, and therefore we have a viable business, I imagine. With that, I'd like to thank my panelists very much indeed for the trouble you've taken to join me today and for sharing your experience, which shows that U-Space is not theoretical anymore. It's happening. We're implementing all over Europe. Thank you very much indeed.